Now, over the past 3 weeks, the country's three biggest political parties have launched their election manifesto. The EFF's focus was broadly land jobs and ending load shedding. Similarly, the DA punted its blueprint to end the rolling blackouts and the overall decline of infrastructure. The ruling party, the ANC, is the latest to have launched its manifesto. Among other promises, the organization is focusing on the country's unemployment crisis, promising to create nearly 3 million job opportunities over the next 5 years. ANC spokesperson Mahlengi, Bhengu-Motsiri and Hajra Omarjee, who's political editor of Business Day, join us to unpack the manifesto in greater detail. Hajra, I think we only have you for now. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Alejandro.
All right, Hajra. I think while we wait for Mahlengi to join us as she is supposed to, let's maybe talk about this manifesto that was launched over the weekend. The difference between the ANC and the other parties is that the ANC has had time to rule.
Well, 30 years as we reach that milestone in our democracy, I think what we've seen in terms of liberation movements on the continent is that this is the time where we see an electoral decline of the liberation movement turned governing party. Now, the ANC is certainly putting out all the stops to ensure that does not happen. It went to its last national election and won just over 15%. And if it continues to lose support in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, where it's won mass support over the last 30 years and helped bolster its national tally, then the party could be in big trouble. But I also think South Africans have matured in terms of democracy, and the biggest blessing for the ANC may be that they have the gift of a weak opposition.
I want to ask you about the issue of opposition. They've come out to say that they are aiming for a decisive victory, Hajra. Of course, we know what the polls are saying here, but we also know that election day is a very tricky day. People say one thing, people tweet one thing, and then people go to the polls and do another.
Well, I think voter turnout is what will matter in this election. If ANC voters stay home, then the DA and EFF will benefit, as well as smaller opposition parties. And if ANC and DA voters stay at home, then we could see a mass rise in the EFF support. So voter turnout is going to be key to watch in this election. I also think that South Africans have slowly lost confidence in all three big political parties and how relevant those political parties are to them. And that may also affect voter turnout. Whoever doesn't show up favors the opposition in that case.
It is a very, very interesting dynamic. I want to peel through some of the layers of this manifesto. Like we've said, the ANC has actually had a chance, to do something about their plans. Some of the stuff that's coming out of this manifesto aren't necessarily new, Hajra. Issues of a sovereign, a wealth fund, for instance, we've heard about that. We speak about the issue of a state bank, which we've heard over the years. So it was, I guess, very difficult for us to see new ideas coming out of the ANC's manifesto.
The ANC also doesn't want to make promises that it can't deliver on. I thought it was good that President Ramaphosa acknowledged the mistakes of the last 30 years and not just the last 6 years when he has been in high office. He also didn't make a promise to end load shedding, but he did say the ANC government was doing everything possible to try to minimize it. Now, I thought that showed maturity in terms of leadership. It didn't show a populistic statement, but it showed the reality of the governance of challenging. I thought the comments around the transformation of the financial sector certainly were interesting. It is not the first time the ANC seems to have said this, but there seems to be a greater commitment. And then the support of SMMEs I also thought was interesting, because that's really where we can create jobs. If you look at the Kenyan economic model compared to our social welfare economic model. What I wasn't quite sure about is how job creation would be improved by social welfare. They told us they would make a commitment to increasing social welfare, increasing the 350 Rand grant as well, but didn't speak to how South Africans could use that money to perhaps start their own businesses. And I thought that needed to be fleshed out a lot more. I also thought it was interesting that Ramaphosa called the Zumaites in the party troublemakers who have left the party, and reaffirmed the ANC's commitment to non-racialism and a constitutional democracy. I think that is interesting in terms of this broad base the ANC is trying to attract, and also to perhaps offer a home to those in the DA who are unhappy with the DA's support of Israel over Palestine. The ANC is perhaps appealing to those people, to the minorities like the Indians and the Khaleds in the DA that are unhappy with the DA. Perhaps Ramaphosa is offering them a political home. But I guess all will be decided on election day. Those Indians and Khaleds haven't traditionally voted ANC.
I must also ask you about the issue of these troublemakers, because I think what the electorate wants to see, what ordinary citizens want to see more than anything, Hajra, is decisiveness around the issue of corruption and state capture. And what it sounded like when the president was speaking was that troublemakers leaving was the best we're going to get out of the situation. People like you and me want to see prosecutions. You know, we want to see real hardcore consequences there. Are we finding that the ANC is still battling to really deal with the issue of state capture?
And I've said this publicly, that if we had seen the President Ramaphosa we saw in 2018, throughout 2019, 2020, 21, and so on, I think the ANC would be a lot more on a firmer footing going into this election. In 2018, he put the country before the party. Since he was elected as ANC president, and because he expected a decisive, overwhelming victory and didn't receive it, he put the unity of the ANC first, and that compromised him and his government in terms of prosecutions. Because if you put Jacob Zuma in jail, you were threatened with civil unrest. So I think now that Zuma and them have left the party, they have a lot more freedom to deal with corruption more decisively. However, it is worth noting that on corruption indicators globally, we are doing worse than we did when Zuma left office. That is how entrenched corruption is, and it's going to take a concerted political will to change that culture, but also the culture of, getting South Africans back to work. With Zuma, we said the fish rots from the head with regard to corruption. I think in terms of work ethic, be it in the public service or private sector, people need to work for the money they paid for. And I think across the board, that is a culture we're struggling with in terms of my own personal observation anyway.
I think I agree with you there quite a bit, Hajra. Let's also talk about NHI. The president did mention the issue of NHI. It's a big elephant in the room at this point. We know that this stands to be one of the most highly litigated pieces of legislation to ever, be passed in South Africa. But he hasn't signed it, Hajra. What does that tell us?
Well, he has a mandate, and his mandate is to have pushed NHI through legislative processes. But he knows it's going to be highly legislated. So we're not sure if he's going to send it back to see if it passes constitutional muster or put government through an expensive litigation process. We do know that the health sector in South Africa needs to be reformed. But we haven't seen a government working like concertedly to transform the public health sector to win the confidence of the private health sector. And then the private sector as well charges highly inflated charges to those of us that can afford it. So we need to get South Africa working. Government needs to perform. It needs to inspire confidence. And that goes to the healthcare sector as well.
I must also ask you, Hajra, about, the ANC of the middle class. And I say this with much trepidation, but I think it's an important aspect that post-1990 we saw this emergence of a black middle class that, of course, now kind of sits in a weird spot where it just looks like there's more people, first of all, on social welfare than of taxpayers. And social mobility, upward mobility seems to be a bit of a struggle. I'm wondering if this manifesto at all spoke to that, the emergence of more black people of color into the middle class.
Well, I was happy to see transformation re-enter and be center stage, both in the ANC's January 8th statement as well as the manifesto. But I thought those statements are hollow, because you and I are both products of the black working class and the black middle class. But we currently have compliance with employment equity and affirmative action sitting at below 50% in the corporate sector, which means there isn't the political will to actually implement economic redress for what you and I, the products and are the result of in terms of our foundation in the earlier years of democracy. And it will be interesting to see how Ramaphosa tries to win the hearts and minds of the black middle class in South Africa. And the failure of the ANC to win the hearts and minds of the black working class and the black middle class, impacted as well by things like load shedding and cost of living, could then result in regime change come elections.
Before I let you go, Hajra, with that said, from this manifesto, is it clear that the ANC does understand the issues that are presented for South Africans at this point? And is there a commitment, I guess, and only from a manifesto perspective, for them to address some of these issues? And is there hope, trust from us South Africans that they will be better should we give them another 4 years?
Well, I've long said that South Africans are not stupid. It's clear the ANC understands the issues, but I question the party's political will to address those issues. 2 weeks of load shedding before elections will result in a change of guard in the country.
Sure. Well, Hajra, thank you so much for talking to us, and I'm sure we'll keep talking leading up to that election. It's been an absolute pleasure. That was Hajra Omarjee, political editor for Business Day. Unfortunately, the ANC could not join us for that interview.